Hi blockheads, it's nice to have you back. This is month 11. We are nearing the end. Okay, this month we're going to make these and they're called bracelets. And then next month we'll make all the pieces, the big half square triangles, and then the last month is sew it all together. So we're nearing the end, we're getting there. But right now let's focus on these. This is called a bracelet. And this bracelet, each one of these is actually 3 blocks. Here's a block, here's a block, and here is a block. And there's 8 of them around the perimeter of the quilt. Okay, the middle block, the gray one, is exactly the same in every single one. Okay, it's gray and white. And in your packet you have 2 different whites, and I want you to mix them up. Okay, you're gonna cut all your pieces and then mix them up. Don't worry that you have all the same, because as you see, this is all different whites all the way throughout the quilt. Okay, now the other thing I want to point out is this block and this block are the same. By the same, I'm referring to the color, okay, because all of them around the quilt are the same block. They're just all different colors, and we'll address the colors when we get over to the sewing station. But notice that each bracelet is actually 3 blocks, a gray one in the middle, and 2 outside ones where the colors match. But you will use totally different colors, well, not totally, but you will use different colors for every one of the bracelets around the perimeter, okay? So 1 gray block and 2 colored blocks that are the same make each bracelet. You will not be sewing these 3 blocks together this month. You will sew them together when you put your quilt together. Okay, let's go over to the sewing station and see. Okay, what we have here is I've already constructed the middle block, the gray one. And remember, I told you all 8 of these are exactly the same. What they are is 4 flying geese and 2 plain rectangles. 4 flying geese, 2 of them are made with a white rectangle and gray squares. 2 of them are made with gray rectangles and white squares. And then you sew them together with a gray, just a gray rectangle that you've cut at 1.5 by 2.5 in between them. Okay, now, what I need to tell you is you need this to finish at 2.5 by 6.5. If you don't have, you should have the 2.5, because that's what you cut your rectangles, but the 6.5 can be an issue if you're not using your scant 1/4 inch. So be sure that you check that before you begin to sew this together. Your scant 1/4 inch is very important. The other thing I will tell you is, after you make each of these flying geese, they should measure what the rectangle measured at the beginning, and each of your rectangles is cut 1.5 by 2.5. So when you're done with your flying geese, which look like this when they're done, they should be 1.5 by 2.5. So check them. Don't bother to sew them into this strip unless they measure 1.5 by 2.5. So then when you're done, this should measure 6.5. If it does not, flip it over and look for either where you didn't keep your raw edges together or where your 1/4 inch got too big. If you need to leave something out, leave out a seam, this would be the seam that you would leave out, the one that goes to the bottom of the gray rectangles. If you leave this one out, you might mess up your points, because see, your points should show. So if you can't figure out where the mistake is, everything looks good, and it's a little bit too small, leave this seam out, the one that's at the base of this gray triangle. Okay, that being said, what we've given you here, you're going to cut these at 3 by 7. That way, do you see? They're a little bit longer, so it gives you a little bit of wiggle room here. Okay, so when you sew these on, you're going to sew them on so that this is pretty much centered. Okay, find the center here and the center here, and then you'll be able to trim this down to a 6.5 inch square. So I'm going to sew these onto the sides now, and then and when I do that, I want to make sure that I'm centering it. So I'm going to make a mark where the center is. Okay. And a mark where this center is. And my camera person, Megan, here is going to have a coughing fit. Okay? And then I'm going to match that center up to this center seam. Okay? And I'm going to sew it. Remember, set your machine up for 1/4 inch piecing, and if you can move your needle to make it that scant 1/4 inch, that's what you want to do. Keep those raw edges right together. And I'm noticing, trying to keep my seams the way I pressed them. Okay, there's one side, and now the other side. All right, now you want to still have your scant 1/4 inch here. You don't want this seam allowance to be any bigger, because what you want is, remember, you're going to have to sew these all together. So you need them all to be the same. You need them all to be even and the same amount here to here. Otherwise, when I go to put it with this piece that I'm going to make, it's not going to match up. This is going to be wider or narrower. And in this case, I'm going to press my seams toward the outside here, towards the leveling pieces. Okay, and now remember, you want to be sure that you don't have any folds here, that this is all laying flat. Because if I trim this and then I find that I had some folds, now my piece isn't going to be the correct size again. Okay, so I'm ready to trim this. Okay, if you have a 6.5 inch square, you obviously have a center to this square, and the center on the 6.5 inch square, at least on this one, is where that 45-degree angle is, and I can just match up my 45s, and then I can trim this. And you will have this much excess, okay? So I could trim around this square. And if you have one of those rotating cutting mats, that would be very helpful at this point. Okay, if you don't have a 6.5 inch square, you can use a regular ruler. I gotta have a bigger one, that one's not big enough. And what you want to do is you want to put the center, and remember, this is the center where the points are. You want to put the center at 3 1/4. So 1, 2, 3 1/4. So I'm going to match up the 3 1/4, and I'd trim this side off, and then I'd rotate it around, and I'd match up 1, 2, 3 1/4 right along my centers where my points are. Trim this side off, and the same thing here. 1, 2, 3 1/4 right through the center here, and now I should have nice straight edges to match up the edges of my ruler, and I trim this side and then rotate it and do that side. So either way, whether you have the 6.5 inch square or whether you have just a straight ruler, you'll be able to trim this down to exactly 6.5 inches. Okay, the leveling things can be very, very helpful. Gives you kind of a second chance, a little just in case. But remember, at all costs, you really want this to end up measuring 2 inches from here to here, because you want them all the same, because these have to match up in your quilt. Okay, so this is the center. You will make 8 of these exactly like this using gray, and you have 2 different whites that we gave you this month to use, so cut them up evenly and just distribute them evenly throughout. Don't use all one or all the other in a square. Okay? All right, we'll be right back. I'm going to reset just a little bit to show you the other part of the bracelet. Welcome back, quilty friends. Okay, we're going to move on to the second part of the bracelet. Remember, the gray one was block 2, or block 1. This will be block 2 that we're going to make. Block 2 has the colors in it. Okay, there are 8 bracelets, and by a bracelet I mean a middle with the 2 ends that match. Okay, every bracelet has a gray center that looks just like this. 2 bracelets will have the same diamond in the square color, but different end colors. Okay, so these are all 8 alike. You will have 2 each that have the same diamond in the square color, and all 8 will have different end colors. All right, now let's move on. To make 2 blocks, 2 of the block 2 bracelet blocks, this is what your pieces will look like. Okay, this is going to make a flying geese. This is going to make a flying geese. These are going to make the diamond in the square, and these are leveling blocks. Okay, so you'll make 2 flying geese with white centers, 2 flying geese with green centers, 2 diamond in the square that match, and then you have leveling blocks. Okay, that said, that's what you will collect in order to make 2. Now, I've started to make this. Okay, this one I have all the pieces ready to sew together. So as you see, it's a flying geese, a plain rectangle, a flying geese that's opposite this one, a diamond in the square, and then this is a leveling block. All right, the leveling block is going to allow you to do what we did here, and that is hopefully make this measure exactly 6.5. Okay, so I'm going to show you to review how to make 1 flying geese unit and 1 diamond in the square unit, which, by the way, I would call a snowball, but in this pattern she calls it a diamond in the square. Okay, in order to do that, you will draw diagonal lines on the backs of all of your little 1.5 inch squares. Okay, for the flying geese, which you've made before, so don't panic. What you do is we're going to sew 1 of these here, and remember, what's important is it's as if you're replacing this corner, and you want to have the edges right together on the corner, and you sew exactly corner to corner. Okay, so to do that, I've taken off my 1/4 inch foot, and I've put on the foot that, if any of you are in class, we call the red dot foot, and I'm going to sew exactly on that line. Don't sew fast, because you want to be right on the line. Okay, and then what we're going to do is trim this down to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to put my 1/4 inch mark right on, and I like to do it before I get rid of the drawn line because it's easier to see than the stitches. Okay, and then now we can get rid of that line. We press it open, and you've done this before, so it should begin to look familiar. Press it nice and flat. Okay, now the other one goes so that they more or less intersect. So they're, oh, I put it on there too quickly. Lost my line. It was still warm, and I touched it to the Of course, I don't have a friction pen. Hang on. Here's one. So don't get too anxious to put it on there. Okay, got my line back. Okay. Same thing, it's as if you're replacing the corner. You want your corner, the line to go right into the corner here, and the corner there. And I'm gonna sew on there.
We need a blooper reel.
We do. I can't believe that did that. That line really wanted to go away. I don't want my thread to be all messy underneath. Do a real good job. Oh, I really didn't do a good job. I'm off already. So let's start over. I didn't do a real great job drawing this line. So I was going to try to fix it and go next to it, and everything came apart. Okay, let's try again. We'll try starting on the orange line. That might be better. This turns out, it'll be amazing. Okay. All right, same thing, press it open. Now, once you do this, I want you to measure and make sure that your flying geese unit measures 1.5 by 2.5, just like your triangle did before, or your rectangle did before. Because if it doesn't, it's not gonna fit correctly into this piece. So you need to be sure that it measures. So check all of your flying geese before you sew them in here. If they don't measure 1.5 by 2.5, you need to remake them. Okay? So now we're going to do the diamond in a square. And it's almost just like a flying geese, only done 4 times. So we're going to sew one of these to this corner, and one of these to this corner. And I'm going to put a pin in one, because otherwise I'll lose it when I take it over there.
So for all the folks out there in TV land, what you're saying is if their flying geese don't measure, they need to recut their pieces and start completely over.
Pretty much, because taking it apart isn't going to help because you've already trimmed it. So if it's not correct, make a new one. All right, I'm doing the same thing. I'm sewing across the line. I'm going to sew across this other one. Notice I don't sew very quickly because you want to be right on that line. Okay, now I'm going to trim these off, and then I'm going to press them open, and we're going to sew the other 2 corners. Again, trim before you get rid of your drawn line because it's easier to see the drawn line than it is. I don't like all these strings. Okay. Usually I stand up to press and cut, but then you don't have to watch me trip over the chair all the time.
It's on the blooper reel.
Another blooper?
Yeah.
That would be. Okay. Okay, now, I'm not going to make that mistake again. We're going to put one of these this way, as soon as it's cool. I'm going to put a pin in that one to hold it. And this one this way. Now I'm going to sew on my drawn line. Sure everything's lined up. I always lower the needle so that I see that it's going to go right into the line. Okay, and now the same thing over here. Okay, looks good. I'm going to lower the needle into my drawn line. Check and make sure that your seams are staying pressed open underneath. Okay, now I'm going to trim this one.
Is there a way to check before you trim if you've sewn in the right spot?
If you've sewn in the right spot? Well,
if it's
you
gonna-
can do this and you should be seeing a straight edge and a straight edge. You shouldn't, everything should be coming together. So if you don't have straight edges here, then you know you probably should take it off and try again. Now you can either press these seams open or you can press these to one side if that actually seems like you're getting less bulk that way. I'd press them to one side at the second time. So iron is powerful. All right. Now this should measure 2.5 by 2.5. And if it does not, again, you probably want to start over. Okay, so now what happens is you're going to sew these all together. This one to this, to here, to here, to here. You should be sewing right here so that you don't cut off your points. With your scant 1/4 inch, you should be sewing right there. Now, in this case, you don't, if you're not exactly, you won't be 6.5 because we've overcut this piece. So when you get done, be sure that your edges all line up this way so you're a perfect 2.5 this way. and then you will be able to trim off whatever you need to make this 6.5. All right, and then what happens is that goes that way, and the other one swings around and goes that way. So that goes this way. Okay, and then you will do exactly the same thing we did here. You will sew the 3 by 7 inch pieces to either side and use the center to trim them down to 6.5 by 6.5.
So to be clear, that is the only piece, this rectangle right here.
Yes.
That's the only one you want to trim off of. You don't want to trim any off
Correct.
of the...
If you need to trim to get this to 6.5, then you want to trim it off here, not off here.
Because you'll cut your point.
Right, because you'll cut your point. And then you'll do exactly what you did here and sew these 3 by 7s onto either side centered, and then cut it down to a 6.5 inch square.
Okay.
Okay? Good luck. If you have any questions, call the shop, stop by. We're here to help you. And remember, there's a chart to tell you what colors pair with what colors. So you'll find out that you're going to have one color that will be the diamond in the square and 2 colors that will be the flying geese on either side. Okay, so remember, use this chart, use the chart in your instructions and this to figure it out. Good luck.